So I've been discussing and playing Engage again recently, and one of the things that I hear a lot is how many units are reliant on wielding the Lyn Ring for good combat, particularly units that are around average speed or lower. The underlying assumption here being that doubling is essential for good combat, and that Lyn is the only way for a lot of units to double. A common refrain is that certain units basically need the Lyn Ring to function. So I'm going to look at what exactly the Lyn Ring does for you, what other sources of speed exist, and how important doubling is to great combat in Engage. I think a lot of units get an unfair shake due to an assumption that they need Lyn to perform well, when really they don't. But before we get into it, a big thank you to my patrons Helix, Aikipu, Lucy Sev, Van West, Acrobatic Jazz, A Family of Trees, Romeo, and Zakar. I really appreciate your support. If you want to get early access to videos, shoutouts in videos, and have access to polls that influence the content schedule, or if you just want to support the channel, you'll find a link to the Patreon in the video description. Okay, back to Engage. Let's start by looking at what Lyn actually does, and why people think of her as a ring that totally fixes a slow unit's combat. To start with, Lyn gives her wielder +5 speed at max bond level, which is really good. She also has a couple skills that relate to speed. First, she has the Speed Plus skill, which is an inheritable skill that adds a flat bonus to the user. This is strong, but it is inheritable, so whether a unit enjoys the Speed Plus skill or not is independent of whether they're using the Lyn Ring. I also want to note here that when I say in this video that a unit is using Lyn, I mean equipping her. Her inheritables are great, but a unit can access her inheritables while using another ring or no ring at all. And since you can put it on as many units as you want, it's not exactly a competitive resource like the Lyn Ring is, where one unit using her means that the other units are not. So Speed Plus is a really good skill that you can inherit from Lyn, but one of the things you get from using Lyn that makes a unit faster is one of her sync skills, Speed Taker, which gives a unit +2 speed for the rest of the map each time they kill a unit on player phase, up to a maximum of +10 speed. The other thing that Lyn can do to make a unit faster is provide them access to the Mullagear weapon, which is a bow that provides +5 speed to the wielder. So those are all of the things Lyn does that give a unit speed. But it's important to note that a lot of these speed boosts aren't unique or don't require the use of the Lyn Ring. The Speed Plus skill doesn't require the user to equip the Lyn Ring, and using the ring doesn't grant that Speed Plus bonus automatically. The unit has to inherit the skill either way. This means that using any other speed emblem such as Marth, Lucina, or Byleth can pretty closely replicate this, minus a point or 2 of speed, as Marth and Lucina give 4 at max bond rank and Byleth gives 3 compared to Lyn's 5. So the main unique source of speed you get from Lyn is Speed Taker, which can be inherited, but if you use the Lyn Ring you get it without spending a skill slot and you get to save 1000 SP. And that's pretty exciting because up to 10 points of bonus speed is very nice. But there are a few reasons why I'm not in love with Speed Taker, even though it's pretty good. First, it does nothing at the beginning of each map. A unit with Speed Taker isn't any faster than they would be without it until they get at least one player phase kill, and if it's a slower unit, you may have to set up that first kill or two for them rather than have a unit be good at combat immediately. Second, Speed Taker costs 2000 SP to inherit if you aren't using the Lyn Ring. And you don't have to worry about this for a unit that is using the Lyn Ring, but I want to talk about it anyway because I see people inherit Speed Taker a lot. For comparison, Speed +5 also costs 2000 SP, Speed +4 costs 1000 SP, and Speed +5 costs as little as 500 SP. So a unit with Speed Taker doesn't become faster than they would with Speed +4 until they've killed 3 enemies on player phase, which will usually happen on turn 2 or 3 depending on how you use your dancer and if you need to set up kills for them. So that's 2 or 3 turns before you're actually doing better with Speed Taker than you would be with a Speed Plus inherit, and you may have had to set up kills for the unit instead of just having the stats. So I prefer the unconditional immediate bonus from the Speed Plus skills, especially because there's a lot of maps in Engage that can either be warp skipped, or the boss can be pulled with Storm and ended pretty quickly, so you may not have as much time as you would like to build up those Speed Taker stacks. Third, Speed Taker is a skill that becomes worse the more units it's on. Speed Taker on one unit is fine. You have to kill units on player phase, so you might as well use your Speed Taker unit to do it if you can. But if you have 2 or more units with Speed Taker, they start to eat into each other's supply of player phase kills. The more units you have with Speed Taker, the more units you have that need to get those player phase kills to make use of their skill, as opposed to just using Speed Plus and enjoying better combat immediately. Basically, if you have one unit with Speed Taker, then you only need to get them 5 kills to get maximum value out of it. But if you have 4 units with Speed Taker, suddenly you need 20 player phase kills to get maximum value out of all of those skills. And maybe you don't need the maximum value, but let's say you even just want speed plus 6 on each of them. Well, that's now 12 player phase kills you need to get with specific units, so it's kind of annoying once you start having Speed Taker on a bunch of units. Lastly, most units just don't actually need Speed Taker to double because there's a lot of other sources of speed or ways to one-round fast enemies without doubling. So Speed Taker's still pretty good, but I would recommend it on only one unit and a unit that you plan on getting a bunch of player phase kills anyway. So let's look at those other ways to increase speed. As I already mentioned, there are 3 other emblems that give a flat speed bonus in Byleth, Marth, and Lucina, but there's also a bunch of other ways to stack speed. Obviously, one can inherit the speed plus skill we already talked about, which is good for 3 or 4 speed in the mid-game and up to 5 when SP is more plentiful if you really need that extra point of speed. There are also meals and tonics, which can easily give any unit that needs it plus 2 speed. Meals are totally free, and tonics are pretty dirt cheap. They don't stack together though, so only use a tonic if you aren't already getting plus 2 from the meal. Particularly in the early and mid-game when you don't have a bunch of emblem rings, there are also bond rings, and it's really easy to get at least plus 1 speed from a bond ring, and the game even gives you the heroes rings for free, one of which provides plus 2 speed. Once you have access to Byleth, you also have rallies, and that can provide plus 3 speed when used by a dragon, or 5 speed when used by a covert unit. So at that point, if you have a really fast enemy you need to double, you can always just use a rally. There's additional tools in the DLC as well, such as Rally Spectrum from the Lyn Ring, or just Camilla's plus 5 flat speed bonus, but I'm going to be focusing on a no DLC context in this video. With all that in mind, for the price of 500 SP, a plus 2 bond ring, and some ingredients, we can get a unit to speed plus 7. Throw in another 500 SP for speed plus 4, and upgrade to Lucina instead of using a bond ring, and bada bing, we're at plus 10 speed for a unit. In comparison, slapping the Lyn Ring on this unit instead would only place them at 1 speed higher before Speed Taker kicks in, but often the extra speed from Speed Taker will be overkill anyway, except for maybe the fastest enemies on the map. So let's look at some specific maps and units. I'm going to show this spreadsheet here sometimes. It just has the defensive stats of enemies for each map, so we can look at what the offensive breakpoints are that we want to be able to hit. At the bottom are the quartiles for all the enemies on each map, so basically this just shows how many enemies a unit can double given a certain speed stat. So for our example unit, let's look at Alfred. He's thought of as a pretty slow unit, and he is. His base speed is only 6, and his growth is an unimpressive 40%. If we took him through the early game, promoted him to Wyvern, and gave him a few levels, he would have about 15 speed. Notably, this is very similar to Ivy's instant promoted base speed of 14. However, Alfred is what I have footage of, so we're going to talk about Alfred. Just know that this pretty much applies to all of those units in that 13 to 15 speed range, which is many in the mid-game. So we take a look at Alfred's 15 speed, we throw a plus 2 bond ring on him, eat a meal, and inherit speed plus 3, and now he's got 22 speed. That's enough to double about 3/4 of the enemies in chapters 12, 13, 14, and 15, even if he doesn't gain another point of speed at any time during them. So his speed problem is pretty easily solved in the mid-game, and we don't need to equip Lyn to do it. Later in the game, doubling can become a little more difficult, but we'll also have more tools such as additional speed rings and Byleth rallies to help us out. Now, you may be wondering, if Alfred can only double 75% of the enemies without Lyn or Speed Taker, what about that last quarter of really fast enemies that Alfred doesn't double? Well, I would argue that it's okay that Alfred doesn't double those. It's not that many enemies to begin with, and there are lots of other ways to deal with them, from ganging up on them, using an engage attack, using a high might weapon like a killer axe crit or a smash weapon, or you can just avoid a lot of them. Alternatively, you can just use one of your faster units as well. Alfred may not be able to double the Wolf Knights in Chapter 13 without Lyn, but Kagetsu can do it at base with speed plus 3, a meal, and a bond ring. Those really fast enemies can provide a great niche for your really fast units, but your slower units being able to double 75% of the enemies and still contribute versus the other 25% is pretty respectable. Even if you want to double those really fast enemies, there just aren't that many of them, so 1 or 2 fast units to fill that niche will do. The rest of your units can be fine without doubling them. My point here is simply that you do not need to be able to double everything for a unit to be competent at combat. Take a unit like Ivy, who can hit the same speed thresholds that Alfred can on these maps. On Chapter 12, an instant promoted Ivy with the same speed boosts I gave to Alfred and a +1 Elfire can double 3/4 of the enemies on the map and one-round most of them as well. That's pretty good. Late in the game, enemies become a bit harder to double, but you also have more resources by then. So you may find you need to give your middling speed units a little more love later in the game, but Engage also gives you the tools to provide that love. Basically, units with good offensive stats can be excellent contributors even if they don't double the very fastest enemies, and I also want to stress that doubling is not the only way to deal with these enemies in one round. Take units like Panette and Amber. They're not terribly fast, but what they do have is copious amounts of strength, and we can leverage that to not have to worry about doubling. Probably the most common build for Panette is Vantage Wrath Warrior, where you can pretty easily get her to 90 to 100% crit. At internal level 25, Panette can one-shot most of the enemies in Chapter 22 with a +5 Killer Axe, and Amber can perform similarly. So even though they may not have the speed to double the fastest enemies on the map, they can just kill them in one shot instead. While Amber and Panette are the poster children for this type of build, lots of units with big strength can do it to varying degrees of success. It's a fine role for units like Etier and Louis, for example, if you decide you want to use them. Etier in particular is often touted as a unit that needs Lyn, but she really doesn't. Just make her a warrior and let the crits go burr. Lyn is one way to get a good offensive performance out of units like Etier, but it's not the only way. Additionally, in a lot of maps, you can just elect not to fight some of the really fast enemies. In Chapter 24, for example, you don't have to fight the fast griffins that are difficult to double if you just go kill the boss. There are even examples of this earlier in the game. You don't have to fight the Chapter 12 Wolf Knights, for example, if you just finish the map before they spawn. None of this is to say that Lyn isn't a good ring. She's really great. Her speed boost is awesome, Speed Taker is great, especially if it's just on one unit, and Astra Storm is incredible for baiting bosses into moving early or even taking a whole health bar off a boss from a distance if your user is strong enough. But most units don't need Lyn to double, except for maybe the fastest enemies on the map, and there's always another way to deal with them. Lyn is just one tool of many, and units shouldn't be defined by her because most of them have other viable builds. Units like Ivy, Amber, Etier, Panette, and Citrine all have reputations for being too slow to double without Lyn, but with easily accessible speed stacking, all of these units have other ways of stacking up enough speed to double and one-round lots of enemies, or have other means of fixing their offense. This is part of why I value units with good offensive stats pretty highly in Engage. If you're a unit like Ivy or Amber with solid offensive stats but unimpressive speed, it's not so hard to work around the low speed. And you're rewarded for doing so with a unit that can do a lot of great combat for you. You can also use skills and stat stacking to overcome other weak offensive stats like strength and magic, though you do so a little differently and it tends to be more expensive. For units with slow or average speed, it's as simple as inheriting the skill that gives you more speed, but for attack and magic it's trickier because magic and strength plus skills are a lot more expensive than the speed plus skill. While speed plus 3 is only 500 SP, strength plus 3 is 1000, and magic plus 3 is a whopping 3000 SP. We do have other options that improve a unit's offensive performance though. Lunar Brace is a skill that makes a unit deal more damage based on the enemy's defense on player phase, but it costs 3000 SP. Sword, Lance, and Axe Power all add a lot of damage to a unit's attack, but they cost 1000 SP for their first level, and most units that are struggling offensively are probably going to want the second or third level, which cost 2000 and 3000 SP respectively. This is achievable, especially since the WoW updated provided more plentiful access to SP, but it's a bit expensive, so you may not want to do it for every unit on your squad if you're using a lot of units that need help increasing their damage. So usually for units that need damage help, I prefer to just give them a ring like Erica or Roy that will help them with their damage instead of trying to fix the issue with stat stacking and skill inheritance, since buying multiple units' expensive offensive skills eats into the SP budget pretty quickly. Engraves and Forges also contribute to fixing strength issues, but even your units that are strong want those, so it's difficult to solve a unit's damage problems without looking to an emblem ring or some of those more expensive skills. So this is why I prefer fixing speed. It's cheaper, it's universal, and Lyn is around for a long time. It also doesn't require me to use a specific weapon type, and it works on enemy phase and player phase. Though for units that just need a little help with their damage, there's always meals, tonics, and rings, just like there are for speed. This also gets at why I prefer a unit that's either good at their attacking stat or speed and bad at the other one, compared to a unit that's okay at both. Often, if a unit is just bad in one area, we can fix that with a single skill as our only major investment, and maybe an emblem ring if the stat is really rough. But if we have to fix 2 stats for a unit, that could take both of our skill slots, and it might be harder to find them a bond or emblem ring that gives a good bonus to both of the stats they need more of. Overall, Engage gives us lots of ways to stack stats, and in particular gives us a very accessible way to improve a unit's speed if they're struggling. And this should be considered when evaluating Engage characters. Less than stellar speed is not a death sentence in this game. In fact, it's often not that hard to fix or work around, so a unit benefiting from Lyn shouldn't be a major point against them when it comes to unit evaluation, because Lyn is just one of a handful of methods for dealing with a unit that has low speed. You'll often hear people say a unit needs Lyn, but I'm not sure this is ever actually true. This is not to say that speed issues should be ignored. They are real issues, and we have to spend skills, resources, and sometimes rings to fix them, but we just shouldn't see Lyn as the only possible solution to a unit's doubling problems. For example, Ivy is slow, it's an issue for her, but we don't have to glue Lyn to her to use her. She can double many enemies using the other speed increasing tools that are available to us, and can provide good chip against really fast enemies. So we should penalize her for her poor speed, and we should consider what she can do with the Lyn Ring, but we should also look at what she can do with the many other tools that exist in the game that aren't Lyn, because she's very good either way. I use Ivy as an example here, but this is true of many of the other units I've talked about in this video as well. But what do you think? Are there any slow units in Engage that you think haven't been given a fair shake? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and if you liked the video, consider giving it a like or subscribe so you never miss an upload. And if you want to chat about Fire Emblem more, consider joining the community Discord. You'll find it linked in the description. But either way, thanks for stopping by, and have yourself a lovely week.